Hello all, let me interrupt for just a moment to tell you about our fantastic sponsor today, and that is AG1, making your mornings both easier and tastier, but most importantly, healthier. Let me ask you this, what happens when you think about breakfast in the morning? More often than not, your mind takes you to many unhealthy options, things loaded with sugar and calories. Tell me I'm wrong. So what is a quick and easy way to start your morning in the healthiest way possible? Well, that brings us to AG1's daily foundational nutritional supplement that supports whole body health. It's easy to make. You put it in this shaker, container, water bottle, whatever you want to call it. You shake it up and you're good to go. It takes literally 20 seconds. It tastes great. It looks very green. It doesn't taste very green. It tastes good. And it has become a part of my daily routine for a long time now. AG1 will cover all of your bases. They've got a long list of supplement facts on the back, everything it contains right in there to keep you nice and healthy. Multivitamin, covered. Pre and probiotic, yes. Immunity support, oh yes. All in a single scoop, in a glass, in the morning, easy, and that's it. So, all you need to do is go to drinkag1.com/shadows or click my link in the description below to get a year's supply of immune-supporting AG1's vitamin D3 and K2, plus, where is it? 5 of these travel packs so you can keep healthy on the go. I'm going away this weekend and I'm taking 3 of these with me so that I'll always be good to go. Easy. Brilliant. Thank you AG1 for supporting this video, for making all of my mornings tasty and healthy. And now to today's video. The question of origin runs deep in many national stories. Most modern nations are founded on proud tales of settlement or conquest, many of which aren't exactly squeaky clean or even true when you dig down into it. The United States celebrates Columbus with an almost saintly vigor, despite the man never actually setting foot on US soil, while modern Britain and its royal pageantry has colonial blood spattered all over it if you go back less than 100 years. National stories are often created to swell the pride of its population, to make them feel part of a vast, beautiful tapestry that culminates neatly in the modern age. However, a lot of it is complete rubbish. It is propaganda that is designed to feed nationalism, and practically every country on the planet is guilty of it in some way or another. When it comes to Russia, and before it the Soviet Union, this national story is complicated and incredibly contentious, with far-reaching ramifications, not least over territorial claims in and around Ukraine. The Normanism, anti-Normanism dispute is a historiographical debate that centers on the origins of the role of the Norsemen, or Vikings, in forming and developing the states of Eastern Europe that would eventually go on to become Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The Normanist theory states that the Vikings, or Varangians, played a crucial role in founding the Kievan Rus, a medieval state seen as a starting point for those nations, while the opposing corner asserts that the development of these Slavic states was an indigenous process, with the Vikings playing a minimal role, if any. This debate is deeply intertwined with national identity, historical narratives, and the politics of historical interpretation, and has been the cause of invasion and territorial expansion for centuries. And if anything, it's only becoming more contentious. The roots of the Normanist debate can be traced back to the 18th and 19th centuries, when nationalistic movements across Europe were shaping the identities of emerging nations. In Russia, historians like Nikolai Karamzin and later Mikhail Pogodin argued against the Normandist view, which scholars like Gerhard Friedrich Müller supported. They argued that the Russian state and its culture were purely Slavic in origin and development, resisting interpretations that attributed significant influence to the Norsemen. So, what's the connection between the Norsemen of Scandinavia and the Normans of northern France? Well, actually, they're somewhat the same entity, just further along in history. The Frankish king presented the area that we know today as Normandy to the Viking leader Rollo in 918 AD. His people settled in the area, and the group that emerged, an amalgamation of the native Franks and the Viking newcomers, came to be known as the Normans. These fearsome warriors spread across Europe and beyond, particularly east, into the depths of Europe. The Normanism debate is not just academic, and has long been wrapped up in nationalistic fervor that sometimes erupts. For many Eastern Europeans, accepting the Normanist theory was seen as diminishing their historical legacy. It was a question of pride and identity. Were the ancestors of modern Eastern Europeans capable of building their own state and culture independently, or were they significantly influenced or even dominated by Norman invaders? The fact that a group associated with the Vikings had anything to do with the formation of Eastern European states might be news to many of you, and that's because we don't know that much about the Kievan Rus. Like the more traditional Vikings, they left practically no recorded evidence of their activities, and much of what we know about them comes from external sources. The Kievan Rus was a medieval state that existed from the late 9th to the mid-13th century, a pivotal period in the history of Eastern Europe. This group emerged in the territories of modern-day Belarus, Ukraine, and Western Russia, and was a federation of Slavic tribes supposedly under the rule of the Varangians, the Norse warriors and traders. The Russian Primary Chronicle, a key historical source written by the monk Nestor in the 12th century, states that the East Slavic tribes invited the Varangian prince Rurik to rule over them in 862 AD, leading to the establishment of the Rurik dynasty. The traditional narrative suggests that these Norsemen, led by Rurik and later by other notable figures such as Oleg and Vladimir the Great, played a crucial role in founding and expanding the Kievan Rus. They established Kiev as the political and cultural center, hence the name Kievan Rus. The Kievan Rus was a true melting pot of Slavic, Norse, and Finno-Ugric cultures. This blend is evident in the artifacts, burial practices, and linguistic traces found throughout the region. The state played an essential role in the spread of Christianity in Eastern Europe, and the conversion of Vladimir the Great to Christianity in 988 AD and his subsequent baptism of the Kievan Rus population marked a turning point, aligning the state more closely with Byzantium and the broader Christian world. The legal code of the Kievan Rus, the Russkaya Pravda, showed advanced legal thinking and was crucial in the development of the legal tradition of the region. The Kievan Rus were also a major player in regional trade and politics. Its strategic location made it a significant transit point between Scandinavia, Byzantium, and the Islamic world. The famous trade route from the Varangians to the Greeks was vital in connecting these regions. The economy was diverse, with agriculture, fishing, hunting, and trade as its pillars. It was a booming society at its peak, but it didn't last. Politically, the Kievan Rus was always a complex federation of principalities. The power struggles among various princes and the external threats, particularly from the Mongols, led to the fragmentation and eventual decline of the Kievan Rus in the mid-13th century. The sacking of Kiev by the Mongols in 1240 AD is generally seen as the final nail in the coffin. To understand the importance of this national origin debate, we need to consider just how important Kievan Rus was in forming Eastern Europe. Quite simply, it laid the foundation for the future states of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The concept of Rus as a culture and political identity began here, and the Rurik dynasty continued to be hugely influential in Russian and Ukrainian history for centuries. In Russia, the Kievan Rus is seen as the beginning of Russian statehood and Orthodox Christianity integral to Russian national identity today. In Ukraine, the Kievan Rus is often viewed as the starting point of Ukrainian history, emphasizing the ancient roots of Ukrainian culture and statehood. Now, the fact that the Vikings spread rapidly across Europe and beyond between the 8th and 11th centuries is widely accepted, as is the fact that they settled throughout the continent and had a profound impact on culture and society. But some areas are far more accepting of this than others. While we have precious little evidence of Viking activity around Europe, their DNA can be found in practically every country. There's no question that this marauding horde of feared warriors played a fundamental role in the construction of European society just over 1,000 years ago, but the further east you go, the spikier this fact becomes. One potential hole in the story is the need for more contemporary sources. Much of what is known about the Kievan Rus comes from chronicles written years later, leading to questions about the accuracy and bias of these historical accounts. Archaeological evidence has provided some insights, but many aspects of the early history of the Kievan Rus remain shrouded in mystery. Now, this isn't unique to Eastern Europe. Considering how long and how extensive Viking adventures were, the amount of concrete evidence for this is minuscule compared with other forms of immigration. The Vikings left virtually nothing, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a British historian who denied their existence in the country or the role that they played in its development. This is a problem for those supporting and opposing the Normanist theory. There's very little evidence either way. Some of the evidence of the link between the Kievan Rus and the Vikings comes from Scandinavia, most notably the grave of a woman buried in Sweden who originated from the Kievan Rus area, and also from sagas written long after the events. Graves found in Kievan Rus areas also tend to be Viking in style, while there's plenty of suggestion of Norse origin to many words used in the region today, including even the word Rus, meaning oarsman rower in Old Norse. Those on the other side will tell you that the word Rus actually means river people in Old Slavic, or could be linked to the ancient Sarmatian tribe of Roloxolani. They will also say that 3 early emperors of the Ukrainian Empire in the Caucasus from the 8th to the 6th century BC had their names, Rusa I, Rusa II, and Rusa III, carved into cuneiform monuments. So how could the word possibly have originated in Scandinavia? Now, to explore this debate more, we need to look at how it has evolved over time. German historian Gerhard Friedrich Müller caused outrage in 1749 when he gave a speech at the Russian Academy of Sciences outlining the Normanist theory. He had spent close to 2 decades studying the Russian Primary Chronicle and other sources, but his ideas was seen as borderline heretic. Over time, most Russian historians fell behind Muller's ideas, to such an extent that there wasn't really even much of a debate. If anything, it was seen as a matter of pride that Russian history and its people were so diverse. It was not until the late 19th century and the rise of Imperial Europe that Russian historians began turning against the Normanist theory en masse. Things got even more contentious through the first half of the 20th century, when any support of the theory was seen as practically supporting fascism and legitimizing Germany's claims over the Slavic people. Of course, the Germans were not the Normans, but at this point, those who wanted to use the debate as a weapon could easily bypass mere facts. To Hitler, the Normans spread around Europe and so were part of modern German identity, while Russians used the term Norman to broadly mean any group from Western Europe. In the Soviet Union, the history of the Kievan Rus was neatly adapted to fit the communist ideology. The Soviet historical narrative emphasized the Slavic origins and downplayed the role of the Varangians. The Kievan Rus was portrayed as a precursor to the Soviet Union in terms of its multi-ethnicity and centralized authority. Early Soviet Union, if you will. During the Soviet era, the anti-Normanist view was officially endorsed, and going against it brought you a one-way ticket to the Gulag. It aligned with the ideological narrative that emphasized the unity and historical prowess of the Slavic peoples, and the Soviet regime used history to build a collective identity and the notion that Eastern Slavic states developed autonomously without significant Norse influence, and this was much more in line with that narrative. However, the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 led to a re-examination of many historical interpretations, including the Normanist and anti-Normanist debate. In the post-Soviet era, there was a renewed interest in exploring the diversity of influences on forming Eastern European states, including the Norse. This shift was part of a broader reassessment of national identities following the end of the Cold War. So today, the anti-Normanist theory continues to find support among some historians and segments of the population in Eastern Europe, often for reasons tied to national pride and identity. However, many modern historians adopt a more nuanced view, acknowledging the complexities that came from indigenous and foreign people, including the Norsemen, coexisting. The debate over Normanism and anti-Normanism is not just a matter of historical curiosity. It has contemporary relevance in identity politics and nation-building. In countries like Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, where history is often a contentious and politicized topic, interpretations of the past can have implications for current national narratives and foreign policy. How history is understood and taught can influence how people see their nation, their relationships with neighbors, and their national pride and aspirations. For instance, in Russia, a resurgence of nationalism under Vladimir Putin's regime has seen a greater emphasis on interpretations of history that underscore Russia's unique path and great power status. This involves a highly selective approach to the Normanist debate, favoring narratives that highlight the indigenous development of Russian statehood and culture and completely sidestepping factors that seem plainly obvious to anybody who's not completely brainwashed. And this is where a debate about what happened over 1,000 years ago collides with the modern era. Putin has long claimed that the Russian and Ukrainian people are one, and obviously he's the right person to rule over those joint people. To make this assertion, he's returning to the Kievan Rus age, which ended in the mid-13th century. It also helps his cause if he can effectively paint a picture of proud Slavic domination during this period, where his descendants built modern Eastern Europe single-handedly rather than under the yoke of the Vikings, who had been asked to take control of the Slavic tribes because they were such a rabble at the time. His claim of one people is based on geographical maps from the 12th century, but even then, the Slavs were a mixture of countless different tribes and were never really a unified people. Ukraine, on the other hand, looks at this claim with plain absurdity. Since then, Ukraine has been a part of the Mongol Empire, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Austrian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire, not to mention the short-lived Cossack Hetmanate that emerged in central Ukraine in the 17th century. It was, of course, then dragged into the Tsardom of Russia and then the Soviet Union before becoming independent in 1991. In Ukraine, especially after the 2014 Maidan Revolution and subsequent conflict with Russia, there has been a conscious effort to forge a distinct national identity separate from the Russian narrative. This includes reassessing historical narratives and in some cases challenging the Soviet-era interpretations that downplayed external influences like those of the Vikings. However, the picture is very mixed in Ukraine today. While most have absolutely no desire to be associated with Russia, many also go against the Normanist theory, choosing instead to create a fabled historic identity which is, in many ways, just as shaky as Russia's. Certain parts of eastern Ukraine feel a much stronger connection to Russia, but to base a 21st century territorial claim on a medieval state that we don't know a whole lot about is just bordering on ludicrous. Now, obviously, there's also a lot more at play here. International prestige, money, arms dealing, and the creeping eastward expansion of NATO. But if you break it all down, it all arrives at the complicated and at times poisonous question of national identity. The Normanist theory is not about to be proven correct or incorrect anytime soon. Without groundbreaking findings, we'll still be basing the majority of what we know about the Kievan Rus on external sources written years and sometimes centuries after the events. Russia has long sought to manipulate this story for its own ends and has for centuries used it as a justification to expand its border not just into Ukraine, but other parts of Eastern Europe. The Tsarist families used a variation of the one people claim to push Russian borders westward, and the Soviet Union also jumped on the bandwagon in the 20th century. You would think that in today's day and age of information, these kinds of debates might be long settled, but if anything, the opposite's true. Both sides have sunk further into their trenches with no clear end in sight. When it comes to Russia, a lot of this is probably down to national insecurity. The country didn't really exist until the 14th or 15th century, and yet has managed to grow to measure 17.1 million square kilometers. That's about 6.5 million square miles. Russia's enormous and includes so many ethnic groups, but it's still cobbled together by stories of greatness and prestige that over the last couple of hundred years, royal families and governments have increasingly pushed as a way of keeping this vast nation together. Ukraine has its own problems of national identity thanks to its short span as an official, unified country. Everybody in the region claims to be the descendants of the Kievan Rus, but who they actually were and where they came from remains one of history's great mysteries. The battle for historical narrative is often fierce, and never more so than in Eastern Europe.